Senior xenobiologist Kim stood frozen at the observation deck, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of the small blue planet. What had begun as a standard cataloging mission in Sector 7B was quickly becoming the most significant discovery of his career. The planet, third from its yellow star, wasn't supposed to have advanced life forms according to the initial scans. But as the ship's sensors penetrated the atmosphere, the data streaming in defied all logical explanation. "Director Choi, you need to see this," Kim called, his voice barely hiding his growing concern. Director Choi approached slowly, her experience with 57 planetary surveys evident in her measured movements. She had seen everything from silicon-based life forms to sentient gas clouds, but nothing prepared her for the data now filling her screens. "These readings can't be correct," she muttered, adjusting the sensor calibration for the third time. "Run another biological scan." The ship's AI complied, and the results remained unchanged. The bipedal creatures dominating the planet's surface exhibited biological properties that contradicted the fundamental principles of evolution that held true across the known galaxy. Kim pointed to the behavioral analysis. "Look at this. They deliberately ingest substances their bodies identify as toxins for pleasure. Their neural pathways actually reward them for it." "Impossible," Choi whispered. "No species would evolve pleasure responses to poison." But the evidence was undeniable. The creatures, who called themselves humans, routinely consumed alcohol, caffeine, and various chemicals that their bodies immediately tried to filter out as dangerous. What's more, they seemed to enjoy the temporary impairment these substances caused. The research vessel spent 3 standard cycles in orbit, gathering data that only became more disturbing with each new discovery. The survey team watched in growing horror as humans deliberately tore their muscle fibers through activities they called exercise, somehow understanding that this controlled damage would force their bodies to rebuild stronger. "It's as if they're purposely breaking themselves to become more resilient," observed junior researcher Park as she compiled footage of human training facilities. "No natural evolutionary path would select for this. It's too counterintuitive." The most alarming discovery came when the team analyzed human medical records. The ship's AI translated thousands of case studies, documenting humans surviving injuries that would instantly kill any other known intelligent species. "This female human," Kim noted, displaying the medical file, "continued to function for hours after losing nearly 40% of her blood volume. She not only survived but fully recovered. This male," added biologist Lee, "was impaled through the skull with a metal rod that destroyed significant portions of his frontal lobe. He remained conscious and was able to communicate while being transported to a medical facility." Director Choi's report to the Galactic Scientific Council didn't mince words. "These creatures violate dozens of evolutionary principles. They can survive extreme temperature variations that would require completely different physiological adaptations in any other species. Their bones, when broken, grow back stronger at the fracture point. Their brains can rewire themselves after a catastrophic damage." In the ship's conference room, the atmosphere grew tense as the implications became clear. "There's only one logical explanation," Kim finally said. "These humans weren't naturally evolved. They must have been engineered." "But for what purpose?" asked Choi. "What kind of civilization creates a species that thrives on challenging its own biological limits?" The final disturbing piece came when the team analyzed human history. These creatures had survived multiple extinction-level events that should have wiped them out. Ice ages, supervolcano eruptions, devastating plagues. Each time they emerged more adaptable and resourceful. "They're designed to survive," Kim concluded in his final report. "Not just survive, to become stronger through adversity. It's as if someone created the perfect adaptive organism and set it loose on that planet." The Council received the report with unprecedented concern. Within days, a full research team was authorized for an extended study of Earth. As Kim prepared to hand over his preliminary findings to the incoming specialists, he added one final note to his log. "Whether humans were engineered as weapons, terraforming tools, or for some other unknown purpose, one thing is clear. Whoever created them built something that refuses to die, constantly improves itself, and seems driven to expand beyond its original boundaries. The real question isn't who made them, but whether they can be contained once they develop interstellar travel capabilities. Based on their current technological trajectory, we have less than 200 cycles to find an answer. As the research vessel prepared to rendezvous with the incoming science fleet, Kim took one last look at the blue planet below. For the first time in his career, scientific curiosity was overshadowed by a more primal feeling: fear. Lead researcher Lee adjusted his camouflage field and stepped back from the edge of the building. 3 days of continuous observation had left him exhausted, but the humans he was watching showed no such limitations. The small team of emergency workers below had been clearing rubble from a collapsed structure for nearly 72 hours straight, stopping only for brief moments to consume stimulants they called coffee and energy drinks. "They should be unconscious by now," Lee whispered into his recorder. 3 days without proper sleep should have caused severe cognitive impairment, yet they continue problem-solving and performing complex physical tasks. Back on the research vessel, Lee's team gathered to compare findings. The room buzzed with a mixture of scientific fascination and growing unease. "Their sleep patterns make no logical sense," said junior researcher Jin as she displayed brain scan data on the main screen. "Most species require uninterrupted rest cycles to clear neural toxins. Humans intentionally deprive themselves of sleep, then force their bodies to continue functioning with chemical stimulants. And somehow they recover completely after just one proper rest cycle. That's nothing compared to their healing abilities," added biologist Sung, bringing up his own findings. "I've been monitoring their medical facilities. Yesterday I observed a human male who had lost nearly half his blood volume in what they call a construction accident. According to our biological models, he should have died within minutes. Instead, they replaced the lost fluid with donated blood from other humans, and within hours he was conscious and communicating." The team fell silent as Sung displayed the medical scans. "The compatible blood donation alone suggests engineering," Lee noted after studying the images. "On every other world with complex life, blood chemistry is unique to each individual. The idea that one human can simply use another's blood is unnatural," Jin finished. "It suggests design, not evolution." The most disturbing data came from conflict zones the team had observed. Using remote drones disguised as local flying creatures, they had documented humans in various dangerous situations. The footage now played on the main screen left even the most experienced researchers shaken. "This human here," Lee pointed to a figure on the screen, "sustained a penetrating injury to the abdomen. Our scans indicated damage to the liver, a significant blood vessel tear, and the beginning of internal bleeding. By any reasonable biological standard, the pain should have triggered immediate shock and shutdown." The video continued, showing the injured human applying a crude bandage to themselves before continuing to help others escape a damaged building. "They don't just endure pain," said Medical Officer Yoon, "they seem to override it through sheer will. Look at these brain scans. They're actually suppressing pain signals through conscious effort." What puzzled the researchers most was the redundancy built into human physiology. The team had compiled a growing list of backup systems that seemed excessively robust for a naturally evolved species. They can function with just one lung, one kidney, partial liver function, and even after losing parts of their brain, Jin noted as she scrolled through case studies. Their bone marrow continuously produces new blood cells at rates that suggest anticipation of regular significant blood loss. What kind of natural environment would select for these traits? Lee had been growing increasingly troubled by their findings. After a month of observation, he called for a special briefing with the mission commander. "Commander, I believe we're looking at the results of deliberate engineering," Lee stated plainly. "The human pain response particularly concerns me. In every other species we've studied, pain exists to protect the organism by forcing it to stop harmful activities. In humans, pain often triggers the opposite response: increased aggression, determination, and dangerous risk-taking behavior." He played footage from a sporting event they had observed, what humans called a marathon. The participants willingly ran until their muscles broke down, toenails detached, and some even collapsed from exhaustion. They call this pushing through the wall, Lee explained. They celebrate the ability to override their body's warning systems. It's as if they were designed to continue functioning even when severely damaged. The commander watched silently, her expression growing grim. "And you've confirmed this isn't cultural conditioning?" she asked finally. "It's too universal," Lee replied. "We've observed these traits across all human populations, regardless of geographical location or cultural background. The capacity to function, despite severe injury, recover from blood loss, survive without sleep, and consciously override pain, these are hardwired biological responses." Later that night, unable to sleep, Lee reviewed footage of a human rescue worker who had suffered second-degree burns, yet continued pulling others from a burning building. The scanner data showed the human's pain receptors firing intensely, yet their actions remained focused and deliberate. No natural species would evolve to ignore signals meant to preserve its life, Lee recorded in his personal log. Natural selection favors individuals who avoid damage, not those who continue despite it. These humans, they're designed to keep functioning until they physically cannot move anymore. They're built to be the last ones standing. He added a final note before submitting his report to the Council. Recommendation: classify humans as engineered organisms of unknown origin and purpose. Their physiological resilience suggests potential military applications. Approach with extreme caution. Behavioral specialist Yuna stood motionless before the observation screen, her normally calm demeanor giving way to visible discomfort. 3 standard months. She had been studying human psychological patterns, and what she discovered left her increasingly disturbed. "Play the mountain climbing sequence again," she instructed the ship's AI. The screen flickered to show a human, male scaling a nearly vertical rock face, thousands of meters above ground level. Her single slip would mean certain death. The human had minimal safety equipment, and according to the data, this activity was something called recreation. "Freeze image," Yuna commanded. "Analyze facial expression." The AI responded immediately. Subject exhibits elevated dopamine and endorphin levels. Brain scans indicate activation of pleasure centers. Yuna shook her head in disbelief. They don't just tolerate danger, they enjoy it. They seek it out deliberately when there's no survival benefit. Her colleague, psychologist Tay, nodded gravely. "It's completely contrary to every other intelligent species we've studied. Logical beings avoid unnecessary risks. These humans, they deliberately create obstacles just to overcome them." The research team had compiled thousands of examples. Humans racing vehicles at dangerous speeds, diving into ocean depths that crushed their bodies, climbing frozen mountains where oxygen levels couldn't sustain life. None of these activities provided food, shelter, or reproductive advantages, the typical drivers of evolved behavior. "But the risk-seeking is just the beginning," Yuna said, changing the display to show a different set of observations. "Look at their social bonding patterns." The screen showed scenes of humans from different geographical regions with distinct physical characteristics and languages, forming tight cooperative units. "They form pack bonds with complete genetic strangers," she explained to the mission commander who had joined the briefing. "Most species only cooperate with genetic relatives or after lengthy trust-building periods. Humans can form immediate, powerful bonds with individuals they've just met." "Some kind of engineered tribal instinct?" the commander asked. "It's more sophisticated than that," Tay interjected. "They form these bonds based on completely abstract concepts, shared beliefs, arbitrary geographical boundaries they call nations, even preferences for games and entertainment. And once formed, these bonds can override self-preservation instincts." Yuna played footage from a structure fire their observation drones had recorded. This human here ran back into a burning building to save someone they had never met before. They had no genetic relationship, no established social bond. The rescuer simply recognized another human in danger and risked death to help. "But surely that's just occasional altruistic behavior," the commander suggested. "Many species show..." "It's systemic," Yuna interrupted, unusual urgency in her voice. "They've built entire social systems around this behavior. They call them emergency services, specific humans whose entire function is to risk their lives for strangers. They don't even consider it remarkable. Most troubling to Una was how humans responded to direct threats or challenges. She had initially expected them to follow the universal pattern of most intelligent life: assess threats, retreat from superior forces, and prioritize survival over confrontation. Humans did exactly the opposite. Their historical records show a consistent pattern, she explained, displaying a timeline of human conflicts. When faced with an overwhelming force or limitation, they don't surrender or accept reality. They become more determined, they innovate, they find weaknesses to exploit. The team had analyzed thousands of human historical records, scientific breakthroughs, and cultural narratives. All showed the same disturbing pattern. Humans encountered a limitation, refused to accept it, and found ways to overcome it. They were told flight was impossible for their species, so they built machines to fly. They were limited by their planet's resources, so they developed technologies to extract more. They faced diseases that should wipe them out, and instead they developed medical countermeasures. Una brought up the most alarming example. When their scientists determined a fundamental limit to computing based on their current silicon technology, they didn't accept it. They immediately began researching alternative approaches: quantum computing, biological computing, new materials. They refused to acknowledge limitations as permanent. The research vessel had fallen silent as the implications sank in. In every simulation we've run, Una continued, when faced with a superior force, humans don't behave rationally. They don't calculate odds of success. They simply refuse to accept defeat, even when it's mathematically certain. Later that evening, Una sat alone in her quarters, reviewing her final report. The conclusion she had reached seemed fantastic, yet the evidence supported no other interpretation. These cognitive traits, risk-seeking behavior, abstract bonding, capability, defiance in the face of overwhelming odds, and pathological innovation suggest deliberate design, she recorded. Natural evolution produces species that avoid danger, conserve energy, and accept environmental limitations. Humans do none of these things. She hesitated before adding her final assessment. It is the conclusion of this researcher that humans display all the cognitive hallmarks of engineered psychological warfare units. They are designed not just to survive, but to overcome any obstacle through relentless innovation and cooperation. Most concerning, they appear programmed to reject defeat even when victory is impossible, making them unpredictable and potentially impossible to control through conventional means. As she transmitted her report to the Galactic Council, Una added a personal note. If humans are weapons, we must determine who created them and for what purpose. More importantly, we must determine if they're still being controlled or if they're now operating independently. A species that treats impossible challenges as merely interesting puzzles represents a fundamental threat to predictable galactic stability. Historian Park hunched over the glowing display, his eyes strained from weeks of analyzing Earth's historical records. The research vessel's database had collected massive amounts of information: ancient texts, digital archives, video recordings, everything needed to piece together the story of human development. What he found made less sense with each passing day. "This can't be right," Park muttered, pulling up another timeline on his screen. His assistant looked up from her own workstation. "What is it now?" she asked, walking over to his display. "Look at this pattern," Park said, pointing to a series of historical markers. "These points represent major catastrophes in human history: ice ages, supervolcano eruptions, pandemic diseases, asteroid impacts. By any reasonable evolutionary model, each of these should have wiped them out, or at minimum, reset their development. By thousands of years, the assistant studied the data. But instead, they emerge from each disaster more advanced than before," Park finished. "It defies every pattern we've seen on other worlds. When the asteroid struck and caused mass extinction of dominant species, the humans' distant ancestors should have died out. Instead, they adapted and eventually thrived." Park had spent 3 months studying human history, and the patterns he uncovered were deeply troubling to the research team. Unlike other species that found a comfortable environmental niche and remained there, Humans had spread to virtually every corner of their planet, adapting to conditions that should have required completely different physiologies. "Pull up the habitat distribution map," Park instructed. The screen changed to show a global view of Earth with human settlements highlighted. They live in frozen wastelands near the poles, where temperatures drop below -40 degrees, he said, pointing to northern settlements. They inhabit deserts where daytime temperatures exceed 50 degrees. They've built permanent dwellings in high mountains, where oxygen levels are barely sufficient for survival. "And look here," he continued, highlighting underwater structures. "They've even created habitats in the deep ocean. One species shouldn't be able to adapt to all these environments. It violates basic evolutionary principles." Most disturbing to Park was the speed of human adaptation. The historical record showed humans moving into new hostile environments and thriving within a single generation, far too quickly for natural selection to operate. "They don't wait for evolution," Park explained during the team's briefing the next day. "When faced with environmental challenges, they immediately develop technological solutions. Too cold, they create heating systems. Too hot, cooling systems. Not enough oxygen, they bring their own," the commander frowned. "Many species use tools to modify their environment." "Not like this," Park insisted. "Other species use simple tools to extract resources from their natural habitat. Humans completely transform hostile environments into habitable ones. Look at these desert cities, massive structures in regions that should be uninhabitable, with complex water transportation, systems bringing resources from thousands of kilometers away." As Park delved deeper into human history, he discovered something even more alarming. Humans weren't content just to modify their environment. They had begun modifying themselves. "It started with simple mechanical augmentations," Park explained, displaying primitive artificial limbs and medical implants. But look how quickly it accelerated. The screen showed the progression of human augmentation technology, from crude replacements to sophisticated interfaces between biological tissue and machines. "They're deliberately directing their own evolution," Park said. "They've mapped their genetic code and are now actively editing it to remove what they consider defects. They're creating artificial organs, mechanical enhancements, brain-computer interfaces. They're not waiting for natural selection. They're taking control of the process." One junior researcher raised his hand. "Couldn't this just be the natural progression of an intelligent species?" Park shook his head. "Not at this speed and not with this focus. Most species, once they reach a comfortable level of technology, slow their development and focus on stability. Humans never stop. They're constantly pushing boundaries, even when there's no immediate survival benefit." Later that evening, Park sat alone in the observation deck, watching the blue planet below. After months of study, he had reached a conclusion that seemed increasingly inescapable. "They weren't naturally evolved," he said quietly into his recorder. "The evidence suggests they were engineered as terraforming organisms, designed to spread rapidly across environments, adapt to any condition, and transform hostile territory into habitable space." He pulled up the final slides of his presentation for the Council, images of human settlements in previously uninhabitable regions, followed by their latest plans for colonies on their moon and neighboring planet. "Their compulsion to spread and transform environments is too deeply ingrained to be a cultural development," Park continued. "They're programmed to seek out challenges, to treat hostile conditions as puzzles to be solved, rather than barriers to be avoided. And now they're turning that same engineering mindset on themselves, accelerating their capabilities even further." Park's final report to the Galactic Council was blunt. "Humans display all the characteristics of purpose-built terraforming organisms. They transform environments to suit themselves rather than adapting to existing conditions. They survive extinction-level events that should reset their development. They occupy environmental niches that should require completely different physiological adaptations. Most concerning, they are now actively directing their own evolution through technology, potentially accelerating their capabilities beyond their original design parameters." He added one final warning. "If humans were indeed created as terraforming tools, they have either evolved beyond their programming or were designed with the capacity for self-modification from the beginning." Either possibility suggests we are not dealing with a natural species, but with something far more dangerous, a self-improving system with an inbuilt drive to spread and transform everything it encounters. Security Director Han's footsteps echoed through the Grand Council chamber as she walked briskly to the central podium. The usual murmur of conversation died immediately. In her 30 years serving the Galactic Council, she had never called an emergency session with all 57 member species required to attend. "Distinguished representatives," Han began, her voice steady despite her growing concern, "I stand before you today with disturbing evidence that requires immediate action." The massive chamber's display screens activated simultaneously, showing images of Earth and its rapidly advancing technology. The most recent images, taken just days earlier, showed prototype engines that the research team's analysts had confirmed were early-stage, faster-than-light drive systems. The species known as humans will achieve interstellar travel capability within 5 years, Han stated plainly. Based on 6 months of intensive study, our scientific teams have reached a troubling conclusion. The screens shifted to show the compiled research, biological analyses, psychological profiles, historical patterns, and technological development curves. The data told a story that had kept Han awake for the past week. "Humans are not a naturally evolved species," she said, allowing the statement to hang in the air. "They display biological resilience, psychological traits, and developmental patterns, consistent with engineered organisms. All evidence suggests they were created as terraforming tools or weapons by an unknown ancient civilization." The chamber erupted in concerned chatter. The representative from the Aldarian Federation, one of the oldest council members, raised a limb for attention. "What specific evidence supports this classification?" they asked. Han nodded to her assistant, who forwarded detailed reports to all council members. "Humans possess biological contradictions that natural evolution could not produce," Han explained. "They can survive catastrophic injuries, function without sleep for days, and heal at rates that defy conventional biology. Their psychological profile is even more concerning. They actively seek out challenges rather than avoiding them, form cooperative bonds with genetic strangers, and respond to threats not with reasonable caution, but with innovation and aggression." The displays showed humans in various environments: deep underwater facilities, polar research stations, desert cities, and mountain settlements. Most telling is their compulsion to spread and transform environments. They do not adapt to their surroundings, as evolved species do. They modify everything they touch to suit themselves. They've occupied virtually every environmental niche on their planet, despite having a single physiology that should limit them to specific regions. The council chamber had grown uncomfortably quiet as the implications became clear. "Based on this evidence," Han continued, "I am officially classifying humans as a Class 1 bioengineered threat. I recommend immediate implementation of Containment Protocol Omega." The word sent a visible shudder through the chamber. Protocol Omega had been used only twice in the Council's 50,000-year history, both times against artificial lifeforms that had broken free of their programming and threatened entire sectors. The protocol would establish a hidden surveillance perimeter around the human solar system, Han explained. Any attempt by humans to travel beyond their system would trigger automated defensive measures. Their communications would be blocked, their probes disabled, and their ships turned back by any means necessary. As murmurs of agreement spread through the chamber, a single figure rose from the diplomatic section. Mina, the Council's chief xenodiplomatic officer, walked calmly to the secondary podium. "Distinguished colleagues," she began, her voice softer than Han's but somehow more commanding, "I have reviewed the same evidence, and while I agree with the classification, I strongly disagree with the recommended action." Han felt her jaw tighten, but maintained her neutral expression as protocol demanded. "Director Han's assessment is correct. Humans display clear signs of engineered origins," Mina continued. "However, we must consider a critical question. If humans were created as weapons or tools by an ancient civilization, where are their creators now?" The question hung in the air as Mina displayed a stellar map. "We have explored over 30% of our galaxy. We have found ruins of 17 extinct civilizations. None show technological capabilities that would allow them to create something as sophisticated as humans. This suggests two possibilities. Either humans' creators came from beyond our explored space, or they were destroyed by their creation, finished the Aldarian representative, their voice barely above a whisper. Mina nodded solemnly. If humans were indeed engineered as weapons, they may have already passed their first test, defeating their creators. But there's another possibility we must consider. She brought up footage of human care workers tending to elderly and sick members of their species, of humans risking their lives to save animals from danger, of massive aid efforts following natural disasters. These are not the actions of mindless weapons, Mina argued. Humans show compassion, creativity, and moral reasoning alongside their more concerning traits. They may have evolved beyond their original programming, developing into something their creators never intended. The council chamber filled with uncertain murmurs as representatives considered this perspective. I propose an alternative to Containment Protocol Omega, Mina said. We establish the surveillance perimeter, as Director Han suggests, but we also prepare for diplomatic contact. We study them more thoroughly, understand their values and goals, and determine whether they represent a threat or a potential ally before making irreversible decisions. For 3 tense days, the council deliberated. In the end, they reached a compromise. The solar system would be surrounded by concealed observation posts, but preparations for eventual contact would begin simultaneously. As Han and Mina left the chamber together after the final vote, Han spoke quietly. You realize what happens if you're wrong, if they are weapons still functioning as designed? Mina looked out at the stars visible through the station's massive windows. The peace our civilization has enjoyed for 50,000 years was never guaranteed to last forever, she replied. One way or another, humanity is about to emerge onto the galactic stage. The real question isn't whether they were designed as weapons, but what they've chosen to become since then. Han nodded slowly, her eyes also fixed on the distant stars. For the sake of all our peoples, she said, I hope you're right.